The Multi-State Professional Responsibility Exam is an exam that you have to take if you want to be a lawyer. Most people take it in the year spanning their second and third years in law school. It's either at the end of 2L, the summer in between, or the beginning of 3L. The idea of the test is to make sure that you know all of the ethical rules that are going to apply to you as a law student and eventually, hopefully, as a practicing lawyer. Most people say that the MPRE is nothing to worry about and that you only need to take a day or two to study. But is that really true? How does scoring on the MPRE work, and does it apply to every jurisdiction? The answers to these questions and more will be answered in the next couple minutes. But before we get to that, please take a second to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments below what year in law school you are, or if you're a pre-law student. Let's get into the video. When studying for the MPRE, your school or one of its affiliates like MPRE might give you something like this. This is MPRE's Professional Responsibility Study Book from last year, and this is essentially what I used to study for the MPRE when I took it last month. I think the video that you guys will have seen the week before this one comes out was filmed during my study period for that test, and we'll get into more of what studying looked like in a second. But I took this test about a month ago from the time that this video comes out in the second week of August. At least this year, which I believe is the case every year, there are 3 or maybe 4 periods of time during the year where you can take the test. I know that there's one in February, I believe there's one in November, and August was the one over the summer. The test only takes 2 to 3 hours to complete, but you can pick which of the 2 days you want to take that test on. You'll go to a testing center, which is essentially just a room full of computers and other people who are taking a multitude of tests that are required by different disciplines. For example, in the room that I took my MPRE test in, there were also people taking real estate licensure tests. The MPRE is 100% multiple choice. It consists of 60 questions in total, but only 50 that are scored. And of those 50, a good goal is to get 30 of those correct. That's going to get you right around the 80 to 85 scaled score, which is required in most jurisdictions. Now, the total possible score, if you get every single question right, is 150. But again, you only need to get about 60% of the questions correct in order to have a high enough score to practice anywhere. Personally, I think you should try to go for 100% and not 60, because if you try to learn absolutely everything that you can over the course of your studying, you aren't going to be thrown off by the couple of questions that just really come down to a guessing game between 2 answer choices. My experience in taking the test was that most of the questions given my studying seemed pretty obvious, but there were a fair number that, even though I had read literally this entire book and done the equivalent of 2 practice exams, I just didn't know. 1 or 2 maybe were because they weren't covered in this very comprehensive study program that I did through MPRE, but most of them were just because 2 answers were really similar, and it's kind of like that whole thing in standardized testing where you're supposed to pick the best answer, even though maybe more than one of them is technically correct. All that to say, I would recommend, based on my experience, to take more than a day to study. Go through whatever program that you're using. If you're using MPRE, which I'll show you a bit of a screen recording right here of what that looks like, that will probably take you about a week to 2 weeks of on and off studying. I studied for a couple hours every evening for 1 week, but I think if I had spread it out to 2, that probably would have been better. And I ended up scoring really well on the MPRE, like far better than I actually needed to. I got 128, and I don't say that to brag, but only to show that this is a very doable test. Studying for 1 week and kind of rushing through it, it only took me an hour and 20 minutes or so to take this test to get through 60 multiple choice questions, which all consist of some kind of hypothetical situation, by the way, and you need to figure out what, if any, ethical rule somebody in that situation is violating for the most part. Going slowly, each question took me just over a minute to read and answer, and I didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about that answer because I had just reviewed everything in the week prior. And again, that led to a very positive result that was totally unnecessary, but, appreciated. I don't ever have to think about the MPRE again. This isn't a test that I would go so far as to say that you have to try to fail, but it would be pretty difficult to fail if you took the requisite time to actually study. If you go through a program like Barbary, if you take practice exams and figure out why the answer is what it is. If you've even taken an ethics course, that's gonna get you pretty close to passing even without any further studying. There might be a couple specific rules that are worth going over in detail, but I had taken my professional responsibility class a year ago, last fall, and I had retained enough of that I'd say more than half of this material already felt very familiar to me. Now, the MPRE, unlike the bar exam in every jurisdiction yet, does apply everywhere. You only have to take it once, and as long as you pay the $25 fee, you can send out that score to any state at all. Every state has a different score that they require, but I think they're all between 75 and 86, which again just means that you need to get a minimum of somewhere between 50 and 60% of the questions right. Now, I mentioned before that there are 60 questions on the exam. 10 of those are questions that are not going to be scored, that are just there for the examiners to test kind of what people are studying, whether that's a fair question for future use, whether the form of the question maybe should be altered in some way or another, but you're not going to know which 10 those are. So really, at a minimum, you should be shooting for 40 out of the 60 to be correct, which is a little bit more than 60%, more like 70%. And again, that's a C- on a test. That's a D+, C- range. So you can think of that as a C-, D+ range on a regular test. It should not be extremely difficult to study for, and there are many free resources to help you get these rules down. The way I studied was by going through every single one of these lectures, doing every single one of the short multiple choice quizzes at the end of each section, and reading all of the material that was suggested to me, which essentially just comes from this book right here, which is an annotated explanation of the rules of professional responsibility. The instructor can speak a little bit slow in the lectures, although I do think that it's helpful to watch them and take notes as you go along. I would just recommend watching on 1.25 or 1.5 speed, especially because you're getting so much repetition of the same information through the lecture, the note-taking document, the PDF of all of the rules, and then your answer explanations and your multiple choice quizzes. At the end of my studying, I also took a look at a couple of charts, both produced by Barbary and just other random websites that I found while Googling, that helped to tie some of the concepts together to help memory-wise. If you guys have any more questions about the MPRE, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to help you find answers to those. In the meantime, I will see you guys with another video next Saturday. I hope that you found this one helpful. Until then, God bless.